Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going in depth into my week number 12 running back rankings and tiers. It is important to note before we dive on into things like fucking Michael Phelps that at the end of the day here, the running back rankings are going to look a little bit wacky because Thanksgiving already happened and a lot of running backs already played. So there's going to be guys ranked higher than they would have initially been if there wasn't 3 games on Thanksgiving. But before we get on into this in-depth breakdown, this fun time at the running back position, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure you leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. We're going to be talking about our sponsor of today's video, BetMGM, a little bit later. If you have any questions about week number 12, please ask down below in the comments section. So without further ado, let's get on to my week number 12 running back rankings and tiers. We begin with tier number 1 at the running back position. In my opinion, all 6 of these running backs are must starts. At number 1, we have Austin Eckler of the LA Chargers going up against the putrid Arizona Cardinals defense in Arizona this week. Currently on the season in half PPR, Austin Eckler is the running back number 1, and in the last 7 games, he's only had 1 game in which he failed to eclipse the top 10 at the running back position. Again, this is an incredibly soft matchup up against a garbage Arizona Cardinals defense, so I expect Austin Eckler to run train in this matchup. At number 2, we have Christian McCaffrey of the 49ers going up against the New Orleans Saints at home in San Francisco. Back-to-back games as a top 13 running back for Christian McCaffrey, currently the running back number 6 on the season in half PPR. The matchup up against the New Orleans Saints is not necessarily this mouth-watering matchup like it is for Austin Eckler up against the Arizona Cardinals, but ultimately, Christian McCaffrey is such a fucking good player that I have to rank him inside of the top 5, the top 3, regardless of his matchup. He has been seeing a decent amount of targets game in and game out in his last 3 matchups. 9 targets, 6 targets, and 7 targets. I really do think Christian McCaffrey is a key piece in this 49ers offense, and eventually he is going to have that game as a 49er where he is the number 1 running back on the week. Next up, we move to running back Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers at home in Indianapolis on primetime Monday Night Football. Currently on the season, Jonathan Taylor is kind of a bust, running back number 26, but recently he's hopped back on the saddle and played incredibly well. Running back number 1 in week number 10 up against the Las Vegas Raiders. Last week, running back number 12, and honestly, I was someone that did doubt Jonathan Taylor. It seemed like this season has gone completely wrong for him, but ever since he's played so well recently, you got to keep ranking Jonathan Taylor near the top, because even if the Colts offense isn't this offense that I thought they could have been with Matt Ryan under center, ultimately Jonathan Taylor's so fucking good that you got to keep rolling with him. At number 4, we have Derrick Henry of the Les Titans going up against the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday at home in Tennessee. Last week, Derrick Henry was the RB number 5. He's really only had 1 down game as of recently, and that was week 10 up against the Denver Broncos, who have a really strong defense, where he was the RB number 31, but he bounced back up against the Packers on Thursday Night Football as the RB number 5, and he's currently the running back number 2 on the season. He has actually seen a pretty solid increase in targets compared to what I thought he'd be seeing, getting 2, 3, 0, 1, 3 targets over the last couple of weeks. So while he's not Christian fucking McCaffrey, he is going to add on some extra bonus points by catching some passes. Next up, we move to running back number 5, Kenneth Walker III. Sir Kenneth Walker III of the Seattle Seahawks going up against the Raiders. The Raiders defense is a complete and utter unmitigated fucking disaster. I know that Kenneth Walker last time out, they were on bye last week in week number 11 up against the Buccaneers in Munich, Germany. Was a down game for Walker as he only finished as the RB number 21, but we have seen the true ceiling of a guy like Kenneth Walker. We have seen him finish inside the top 3 twice thus far in his illustrious rookie career. This week up against, again, an incredibly bad Las Vegas Raiders defense. I fully expect Kenneth Walker to take advantage and expose that defense. At number 6 to close out tier number 1, we have Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders going up against the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle. Now, I was someone early on in the season who clowned on the Seahawks defense, but after the first couple of games, the defense has really turned it on in Seattle. And when I say turn it on, I don't mean that they're like the best defense in all of the NFL, but they're a lot better than I would have thought they were going to be going into the season, as is the whole Seattle Seahawks team, right? Because I don't think anyone expected them to be this good this season. In back-to-back games, Josh Jacobs has been a top 10 running back in half PPR, RB number 5 on the season, and he had a great game up against a solid run defense in the Broncos last week. Again, the Raiders kind of are a disaster. It's a fucking dumpster fire over there. It's really bad in Las Vegas, but ultimately, even with this shit show going on around Josh Jacobs, he continues to impress, so he's got to be a tier 1 running back for me. Now we move into tier number 2. These guys are also basically all must-starts, but I just wouldn't put them necessarily in the same tier as the running backs we were talking about before. But if you want to make an argument that, oh, Nick, Travis Etienne's your RB7, I actually think he should be in tier number 1, then I'm not going to have some crazy fucking in-depth war with you in the comment section trying to discuss something like this. So last week we did see Travis Etienne have a down game. Well, technically he didn't play a game last week because they were on bye, but the week prior to the bye up against the Chiefs, RB 29, but prior to that, RB 3, 7, and 9. Travis Etienne is a key focal point in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense, and while he doesn't see as many targets as I honestly thought that he would, I do still think he's an excellent pass catching back, and it wouldn't surprise me if he got 4 or 5 targets in this matchup up against the Ravens. The Ravens last week were in an absolute stalemate snooze fest up against the Carolina Panthers, but I think this week this game should be a little bit more interesting between the Jaguars and the Baltimore Ravens. Travis Etienne is a guy that I have full trust in. Ever since taking over from James Robinson, Etienne has proved to us that he is an incredibly talented player, so anywhere outside the top 10 for Travis Etienne is egregiously wrong. At number 8, we have my guy 9-inch Nicholas Chubb of the Cleveland Browns going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. So when it comes to Nick Chubb, we have seen a bit of a downfall over the last 2 weeks, RB 28 and 14. Now, that doesn't mean that I think Nicholas Chubb is all of a sudden some dick cheese running back that can't do anything, but I do now realize that there are some limitations in the game of Nick Chubb, and obviously that is because he doesn't catch very many passes, and because the Buffalo Bills defense was really good last week. The Buccaneers defense isn't what I thought they would be going into the season. Chubb is the running back number 4 in half PPR currently, and again, even when he's on this downward swing, he hasn't finished as a top 10 running back over his last 2 games. Ultimately, you can't panic when there's a guy as talented as Nick Chubb, so Nick Chubb still my RB number 8. At number 9, we have Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints going up against the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco. Over his last 3 games, he has been pretty disappointing, RB 18, 36, and 23, but ultimately, it's another scenario like with Nick Chubb. We have a running back that is incredibly talented on a team that wants to give him the rock. Now, prior to that downward swing, we were seeing games where Kamara would have 10, 9, 6 targets, where he's finishing as a top-end running back in fantasy football. This matchup up against the 49ers is not a game where they're going to be able to run the ball a shit ton because the 49ers defense is really good, and that offense just blew the back out of the Arizona Cardinals. So I fully expect that we will see a lot of pass-catching usage for Alvin Kamara in this game. Again, this hasn't been the season that I thought Alvin Kamara would have, but again, he's such a talented player, it's hard to argue against him. At number 10, we have Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers going up against the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. Despite the Eagles having one of the best pass defenses in all of the NFL, the rush defense has a lot to be desired, honestly. A streetcar named Desire if you ever had to read that shit in high school. Last week, RB number 17 for Aaron Jones. It's kind of been a rocky road of a season for Aaron Jones. Starting at week number 1, I'm just going to read off all of his running back finishes. RB 29, 2, 52, 18, 32, 32, 4, 11, 32, 17. So there's been some great games, there's been some down games, but ultimately at the end of the day, I do think the best course of action for the Packers to try to win this game is to feed the rock directly down the throat of Aaron Jones, who's also shown a lot of pass catching prowess this year. His biggest problem has just been not scoring touchdowns. He's only scored at least 1 touchdown in 3 games. So while he technically has 5 touchdowns on the season, they've only came in 3 games because he scored 2 touchdowns in 2 games and 1 touchdown in another. Again, I guess I am someone who's a little bit more confident in Aaron Jones. The matchup is pretty delightful in my opinion, so I will keep rocking with Aaron Jones. At RB number 11, we have a new face, and that is Jeff Wilson Jr., running back of the Miami Dolphins, going up against the worst run defense in the NFL, or at least one of the worst run defenses in the Houston Texans at home in Miami. me. Ever since becoming a Miami Dolphin, he's been the RB6 and 10 over the last 2 games. Now coming out of the bye, I think he could see even more touches in this matchup. Again, the Houston Texans defense is absolutely fucking atrocious at defending the run. They are soft as baby shit, and I think this is a game where you see Jeff Wilson Jr. truly finish as one of those potential top 5 running backs. Again, I have him ranked at RB11, but the upside is truly there, as is with all of these running backs inside of tier number 2. Now we move to tier number 3. These guys are not necessarily must starts. I still like all of these guys, but we'll quickly realize, since there were so many running backs that played on Thanksgiving, that at some point there is going to be a very evident drop-off in talent, and based upon my projections on how I feel they are going to actually do on Sunday and Monday. But before we get on into the other running backs, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our sponsor over at BetMGM. If you're a brand new user to BetMGM and bet $10 on any World Cup pre-game money line, you'll win $200 in free bets if any team scores a goal in the World Cup. So I'm going to show you what to do right now on the screen. It's going to pop up on your screen. You're going to navigate to the top after you sign up and go on over to the soccer tab. It says soccer, and then there's a little soccer ball right next to it. And then you're just going to bet on any team. For all intensive purposes here, we're just going to bet on the biggest favorite. Going to bet $10 on that, and we receive $200 in free bets if this team that you pick gets blown out. If this team wins, it doesn't really matter, because someone's guaranteed to score a goal in the World Cup, and you are guaranteed to get $200 in free bets. And guess what? Even if you don't know too much about the World Cup, again, your bet doesn't have to win. And also, these free bets can be used on any sport once you receive them. So please make sure that you guys do take advantage of this offer right now before it's too late. It's not going to last forever. It will be expiring relatively soon. So again, if you want free money, make sure you take advantage of that. Now we move to tier number 3, RB number 12, James Conner. Ever since coming back from the injury, he has been relatively solid. RB 25 and 14 last week up against the Niners. Again, the Niners have a pretty stout run defense, and yet James Conner had an excellent performance. This week he gets the LA Chargers, who are the exact opposite. It's opposite day. The Niners are an excellent defense. The Chargers defense is absolutely fucking abysmally bad. So I think James Conner should be having a solid performance here, as he has scored 3 touchdowns in the last 3 games. I have very big and very high expectations for James Conner. He was one of those guys that I really banged the drum for in the offseason. Obviously, things went awry early on in the season. Things were going incredibly bad for James Conner, but again, he's a guy that I have full confidence in. It seems like he's been playing better coming off of the injury early on in the year. It was hard to watch this guy play football because he did not look like the same running back from 2021, but it appears recently, coming back from the injuries, hopped in the time machine. I'm very confident in James Conner, especially if Kyler's back in this game. At number 13, we have David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears up against the New York Jumbo Jets in MetLife. Now, when it comes to David Montgomery, this matchup is definitely tough, right? The Jets defense is not this soft defense. We just saw an absolute defensive battle between them and the New England Patriots last week. David Montgomery went off up against the Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta. David Montgomery was a guy that I talked up relatively highly last week. I don't think David Montgomery is the most talented player on earth, but ultimately he has been gift-wrapped an excellent situation because of the injury to Khalil Herbert, and now David Montgomery is the head honcho. Prior to that, it was kind of like they wanted to almost use a true 50-50 split. Give Khalil Herbert touches, give Montgomery touches, but now with Khalil Herbert hurt and Tristan Ebner being the number 2, they kind of have to push themselves further towards a David Montgomery workhorse running back role. Again, I don't think David Montgomery is the best player to ever walk the fucking earth, but the situation is certainly very positive. At number 14, we have Miles Sanders of the Philadelphia Eagles going up against the Green Bay Packers this week at home in Philadelphia on Sunday Night Football. 2 atrocious games out of Miles Sanders back-to-back. Jordan 96-97, RB 38 and 39 over the last 2 games, but prior to that, he was relatively consistent. RB 8, 16, 14, 37, 3, 48, 18, 11. Again, there are going to be down games when you are at such an explosive offense like the Eagles, and there are so many weapons to give the ball to. Again, when it comes to Miles Sanders, it really isn't an indictment on his talent at all. It really just has to do with the fact that there are a bunch of different players on this team that can be getting touches stolen, that can steal touches away from Miles Sanders, especially Jalen Hurts, and they do like to utilize other backs on the team, but he's kind of like a worse version of Alvin Kamara because I have more trust in Alvin Kamara. But again, 2 down games out of a guy like Miles Sanders, who we've seen peak as a top 3 running back in fantasy. I'm just going to keep ranking him pretty highly. Next up, we move to tier number 4, headlined by Antonio Gibson Gibby of the Washington Commanders, going up against the Atlanta Falcons at home in Washington. Back-to-back games as a top 15 running back. Now, I was someone who was strictly off of Antonio Gibson in the drafting process this offseason. I talked so negatively about him because I thought Brian Robinson was going to be the guy. Obviously, what happened to Brian Robinson happened to Brian Robinson, and then the season started, and it was like, oh shit, Nick's an idiot. RB12, RB15. And then after that, we saw a great fall like Humpty Dumpty off the wall. RB25, 36, 45, 27. But magically, the second that Brian Robinson stepped just half a foot onto the fucking field, his big toe onto the field, then Antonio Gibson, a fire was lit under his ass. He was looking atrocious early on. He's been looking fantastic as of recent. The Atlanta Falcons defense is dog shit, so I like this matchup for Gibson a ton. At number 16, we have Latavius Murray of the Denver Broncos going up against the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. RB11 last week up against the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the Panthers defense, as we saw last week, is a little bit better than most people give them credit for, but with the release of Melvin Gordon from the Denver Broncos, they don't really have too many options to give the rock to outside of Latavius Murray, and there's also a lot of injuries at the wide receiver position for the team, so I think Latavius Murray is going to continue to be a top-end option for the Broncos. Obviously, starting anyone on the Broncos is, a situation where you might want to pull your hair out because Mr. Unlimited Russell Wilson is absolutely dick cheese, but ultimately Latavius Murray is really good, and I think that he honestly deserves to be in that middling RB2 conversation every single week. At number 17, we have Rachaad with 2A's White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going up against the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland. Now, when it comes to Rachaad White, he is by far and away the most risky player I have ranked inside of the top 20. Or at least the top 17 that we've seen thus far, because of the fact that while I think Rachaad White's a great player, there is still a chance that Uncle Leonard Fournette is the guy for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Coming before the bye, they were on bye last week up against Seattle and Munich. 22 carries for White, 105 yards, so he does look like a very solid player. The Browns defense can get exposed by the rushing attack of an offense. We've seen it with the Bills. We saw it with the Dolphins. So I do really think that Rachaad White is in a great scenario here to succeed. The question is the team actually going to commit to him being the guy, or are we going to see some bullshit where we think Rachaad White's going to be the guy, and then Leonard Fournette ends up being the guy, which causes me to rank him lower than he could be ranked if we knew guaranteed the amount of touches he'd be getting. At number 18, we have Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers going up against the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. Over the last 2 weeks, it seems like Najee Harris hopped into a fucking time machine like his name was Marty McFly, and it's just crazy because he literally looks like the Najee Harris from last year, and early on the season, this guy looked like he had no idea what he was doing. Now, he was coming off of a pretty serious injury. Now, it wasn't some season-ending shit, but it was something that seemed serious that could impact his play, and I feel like it did. Last week, he was the RB3 up against the Bengals defense. This week, he gets the Colts on Monday Night Football. The Colts defense is not amazing, and it's not awful. It's pretty middle of the road. I think this matchup's pretty decent for Najee Harris. At number 19, we have Dameon Pierce. Now, Dameon Pierce is normally a guy that I'm in love with playing, but the Miami Dolphins defense is one of the hardest defenses to face in the NFL against the run, and the Miami Dolphins defense at home is also significantly better than compared to when they are away. So I think Dameon Pierce is going to end up getting locked up and thrown away the key by the Dolphins defense. He is still ranked this high again because so many players already played on Thanksgiving, and because of the fact that he's going to see enough volume to where he could break free and become like a top 15 guy, but this seems far from an ideal matchup for Pierce. At number 20, we have Samaje Perine. This take is assuming that Joe Mixon does not play. If Mixon plays, he's going to be ranked much higher in the rankings. Last week, Perine was the RB number 2 in half PPR, absolutely taking a shit on the chest of the Pittsburgh Steelers defense that I think is a pretty underrated defense. Samaje Perine had a day. He scored 3 touchdowns. Do I expect him to score 3 touchdowns up against the Titans defense? Fuck no, baby. But do I think that Samaje Perine could end up eking his way into the top 15, he should be a top 20 back at least, so that's why I have him ranked inside of the top 20. At number 21, we have Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs going up against the LA Rams this week at home in Kansas City. Now, the biggest issue with Pacheco is that he doesn't catch any passes. He's only had 3 total targets on the season, and that is ultimately his downfall because he hasn't scored a touchdown outside of week number 1, and it's hard to project him much higher, even if he is this very talented back averaging 5.2 yards per carry. If he's not diving into the end zone, if he's not catching a couple of balls, then it's hard to imagine him finishing as a top 12 guy. He was RB20 last week. He had over 100 yards. Again, he's a very talented player, but if he's not scoring, if he's not catching passes, it's hard to rank him much higher. Now we move to tier number 6 at the running back position with D'Onta Foreman of the Carolina Panthers going up against the Denver Broncos at home in Carolina. It's been a pretty topsy-turvy season for D'Onta Foreman ever since Christian McCaffrey left. We've seen games as high as running back 5, games as low as RB48 last week up against the Ravens. Again, the Broncos defense is nothing to scoff at. The offense is laughable. The defense is rock fucking hard. I fully expect D'Onta Foreman to have a decent game here, but again, this Panthers offense is a disaster. Mono man Sam Darnold, Kid C Ghost himself, is under center, so that throws another wrench into things. Maybe that's a huge positive for D'Onta Foreman, and it really fluffs him up. It makes the blood flow downstairs, and Foreman ends up blowing the back out of the Broncos defense. Or maybe it ends up being way worse. It ends up being that D'Onta Foreman fails fucking miserably, falls right on his face, and it could be bad. But again, we don't know what Foreman looks like as the lead back with Mono Man Sam this season. Sam Darnold came out hot off the gate last year. He looked really good, but after that, he didn't look too good when he came back from injury. So again, I'm not too sure what to think about Foreman. I don't think he's a bad play, but I also don't think he's a great play. And same thing could be said about all these running backs in tier number 6. At 23, we have Cordero Patterson of the Atlanta Falcons going up against the Commanders. Now, last week, or in Washington, last week we saw Cordero Patterson return a touchdown from a kick. And that's really all he did in that game. So I'm hesitant to rank him much higher because all we saw and the only bright spot in that game was that explosive kick return. Now, Patterson can do that any week, but that's not something you're fucking betting on. You're not betting on the fact that he's going to do that. And if you are, you're playing an incredibly dangerous game. Now, Patterson, again, has looked really good at points in the season. He's been a top 5 running back twice, top 8 running back 3 different times. So he clearly has the talent. This game is projected to be a little bit wet in Washington, so it's going to be a little bit rainy. Maybe that goes more to the run game. But we have seen already that when they played up against the Panthers in the rain, since Patterson was coming off that injury, they didn't necessarily go to him because they didn't want him to re-aggravate his injury in the rain. So it's a very complicated situation and why I have him ranked so low. At number 24, we have Michael Carter of the New York Jumbo Jets going up against the Chicago Bears at home in MetLife. So Michael Carter was the RB49 last week in that game where the whole entire team shit the bed. And in reality, it wasn't Michael Carter's fault. It was the fact that Zoomer Zach Wilson absolutely is atrocious. Zach Wilson went out there and averaged 2.7 inches per play. Just, I think, slightly larger than a micro penis of play from Zach Wilson. It was absolutely embarrassing. It was hard to watch. He's now benched for Mike White, so hopefully up against a bad Bears defense, we should see Michael Carter bounce back, but I also don't think Mike White's necessarily this dump-off merchant that Zach Wilson could be at points. Next up, we move to the final tier at the running back position. Tier number 7, headlined by Leonard Fournette, Uncle Lenny as RB25. Again, Leonard Fournette could come out here, be the number 1 running back, completely destroy my expectations, kick me directly in the cock, and it wouldn't surprise me. But he could also go out there and maybe, since he's banged up going into the week, they give him less work. And he ends up not being the best. So it's a dangerous game here with Uncle Lenny Fournette. At number 26, we have Brian Robinson Jr. of the Commanders going up against the Falcons in Washington. Again, this is an ideal wet dream level matchup up against a bad Falcons defense, but ultimately it really does feel like Antonio Gibson has taken over there. At number 27, we have Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins going up against the Houston Texans at home in Miami. While Jeff Wilson Jr. has taken over as the lead back, we've still seen Mostert finishes the RB 10 and 21 in the last 2 weeks ever since Jeff Wilson Jr. arrived. Again, this is another one of those matchups where you wake up in the morning and your fucking cock is hard thinking thinking about the fact that the Houston Texans defense is going to get the dog shit beat out of them by the Miami Dolphins offense. The issue, though, is still there. The fact that his touches have reduced. He's still getting a decent amount of targets. So I think his ceiling is relatively high. I think 27 feels a little low. But at the same time, Jeff Wilson is so good that is it really that low? At number 28, we have KD, Kenyon Drake of the Ravens going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville. Now, Kenyon Drake was a guy that I banged the drum for going into last week with Gus Bus Edwards inactive. Seems like Gus Edwards is going to play this week, and now you're playing running back roulette with the Baltimore Ravens, even with Lamar being there, puts a further wrench into this situation. These guys, Drake, Mitchell, and Hunt, not as ideal as Raheem Mostert, Brian Robinson, and Fournette, but they're all pretty risky. At number 29, we have Elijah Mitchell of the 49ers going up against the Saints at home in San Francisco. McCaffrey's clearly the guy, but we saw in week 10 up against the Chargers that the 49ers are not necessarily just going full in, balls deep McCaffrey every single play. Mitchell got 18 touches in that game, or actually more than that. He had a combined 20 touches, or technically 19, I guess, because he had 2 targets, 18 carries, 1 reception. He had just 9 touches last week, but they're still going to go to him. And if this does become a blowout against the Saints, we could see even more Mitchell. Final guy here, Kareem Hunt of the Cleveland Browns going up against the Bucks at home in Cleveland. Outside of week number 1, we haven't seen shit out of Kareem Hunt, but we all know deep down that Kareem Hunt has another one of those big games inside of him. The question is, will it be this week, or will it be maybe up against the Texans next week in week number 13. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying today's video, please make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. Make sure you guys check out BetMGM. Click on that link in the video description. It helps me out a ton, and it helps you out a ton because you get $200 in free bets. I love you guys all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, good boy.